Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. So if you're unfamiliar, we're archivists with distinctive collections and digital engagement, which encompasses the university archives, the digital library, and special collections. Today, we're going to talk about student divestment activism. And I want to start by highlighting the last time the university had a major physical in-person call to action, which was March 15th, 2019. Student speakers Gracie Stagliano and Yvonne Nguyen led demonstrations and a march to the president's office to present him with two demands. One was the university's carbon neutral pledge, move it up to 2030, as well as enter into a power purchase agreement for renewable energy by 2020. This event sort of represented not only a local response to the huge international movement for a more sustainable future, but it was also a representation of all the universities on campus where students were getting involved and trying to get the university to divest from fossil fuels. These goals were, let's see. And then the second one that happened was actually in 2020 when we all were virtual, is the after the George Floyd riots, as well as the Black to Villanova Instagram account came around. Students got together and they petitioned the university, as well as made calls to the president's office for more equality on campus, which we see today with the Aquaritas Presidential Task Force on Race. So these two different forms of activism and calls to action happened on campus, and it kind of asks, kind of begs the question is like, how do we actually move the needle when it comes to social change? How do we persuade large institutions from universities and corporations to take socioeconomic, political, and environmental concerns seriously and make the necessary choices to enact ethical change? Recent years, we've seen a variety of ideas emerge, broadly centered around three distinct strategies. One is divestment, two, engagement, three, activism. Today's main conversation is about divestment and what that looks like in a historical context, as well as on our own campus, as well as I will briefly talk about activism and preservation and how that is becoming a collaboration today on universities. So divestment, the idea is simple, is to pool money, talent, and public approval away from banks and financial institutions that invest in companies that either are causing harm or that the money is reinforcing and legitimizing unethical or non-legal practices. Divestment builds on awareness and provides a distinct platform of addressing cause and effect, and explicitly spells out particular goals for frontline resistant efforts. Also, other avenues, we see law and regulators incapable of taking meaningful action under a capitalist society. So divestment sends a clear message with the language of money, and money talks. This pressure is not only for universities to do the right thing investment-wise, but have universities carefully be deliberating who they align and associate with. With anti-apartheid campaigns, were actually most effective not when students marched against US government support of racist policies in South Africa, but when students actually started to demand university divestment. Divestment is a call to action, which is actually a natural evolution when you think about the history of student activism. National student movements became widespread in the 1920s with organizations like the National Student Federation and the National Student League, which opened hundreds of chapters, and they held rallies and conferences on liberal education, democracy, and labor rights. A real turning point was in February of 1960 when 4 African American freshmen at the North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University sat in a whites-only lunch counter in Greensboro. Their nonviolent protest of segregation sparked a widespread student involvement, which led into the civil rights movement. So during the 60s, we're thinking of civil rights, the Vietnam War, feminism, all these movements were growing on campus, and it increased until 1968, which is considered the year of the student, according to Mark Edelman. He's the author of Student Resistance, A History of Unruly Subject, where students were rioting and took to universities, factories, and governments across the globe. So these are different divestment movements. Divestment really took shape on university campuses during the Vietnam War. The precursor is the entry point of divestment with Dow Chemical and the presence of recruiters on campus. And Rebecca will touch on that later of what that looked like on Villanova's campus. But divestment really emerged as a successful strategy in the 1980s in the fight against South African apartheid. More recent times has been divestment protests over university investments in fossil fuel companies. Last year, the Climate Finance Action Organization stated that in the last decade alone, $40 trillion has been divested from fossil fuels. Recent years has seen university students call for divestment in the industrial prison complex, divest in companies that are running in the West Bank during the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. I also neglected to put a picture up here, but in the 1990s, there was also a divestment in the tobacco industry. Harvard University, City University of New York both divested stock out of tobacco companies, and we actually see this as a successful thing even to this day because many universities are smoking free. You're not allowed to smoke on campuses. So there's this really unique success rate of student divestment activism, but I'll hand it over to Rebecca, who will talk about what that looked like in Villanova.
Thanks. Okay, so I want to start by saying that I just put this together for this presentation. I'm sure there's more that could be discovered in our university archives or interviewing people on campus or alumni. And if anyone is interested in this topic further, we would really welcome that. And please reach out to us. But I'm just going to give an overview of these earlier divestment movements that Beaudry mentioned, and particularly how they played out on our campus. And then we'll talk about collecting and preserving and accessing information in archives here and others as well. So to begin, 1968, the year of the student, we can see divestment activism at Villanova slowly beginning to grow with the formation of a small group on campus called the Concerned Citizens. And this article, appearing in Villanova's alumni magazine in July 1968, highlights the group's efforts over the previous academic year. And we can further trace details of the group's activism and campus reactions as they happened in past issues of the Villanovan. The Concerned Citizens began in fall semester 1967 with a group of 5 students, their initial concern being opposition to the war in Vietnam, but they quickly realized their concerns and activism would expand to broader issues. Further, as student Joe Burt states in this article, their ultimate goal became not just promoting the end of the war, but helping to foster a birth of genuine general social concern and individual responsibility at Villanova. They began cautiously and expected opposition, realizing Villanova's reputation as a conservative campus. The group first successfully gained official status as a recognized university organization. They set up a literature table in the popular campus dining spot, the Pie Shop. They would organize lectures, screenings, and peace vigils. They canvassed the dorms, and within a month, membership had grown to 41. In October '67, about 100 students from Villanova joined students from Haverford and Bryn Mawr to attend the National Mobilization for Peace to End the War in Vietnam rally in Washington, D.C. But the most visible and perhaps impactful efforts were the demonstrations on campus. Both the Alumni Magazine article and the Villanovan note an October 5th silent vigil as likely the first political demonstration of any kind on Villanova's campus. It was 1967. For a half an hour at 12 o'clock, demonstrators, numbering 12 at the beginning and about 20 by the end, stood silently outside Doherty Hall and held a sign that read, "We are thinking about the war in Vietnam. You are invited to join us." A small crowd of surprised onlookers gathered, but nothing more occurred. The concerned citizens' next planned event was a demonstration to protest recruitment efforts on campus by Dow Chemical Company, makers of napalm, the highly flammable gel with horrific human consequences used by U.S. military during the Vietnam War. Let me see, I want to go to this website. Give me a minute. Here we go. This demonstration was part of a national movement of hundreds of similar protests across college campuses that year. For students protesting the war, Dow Chemical served as a corporate target to focus pressure on. And at University of Wisconsin-Madison, this is there, not Villanova, the protest against Dow Chemical recruiters gained national attention when city police officers used riot sticks and tear gas to forcibly remove student protesters blocking the Dow interviews. It was the first protest at a major university to turn violent, with thousands involved and dozens injured. And I really like this website that Wisconsin-Madison has put together. They have interviewed 6 different students that were there that day and their differing opinions. You can read their interviews. There's a timeline and more photos, facts, resources, and it's just a nice little site of the events. So, how do I get back to where we were? I'm not sure I'm on the current slide. No. Sorry, guys. Okay. So, a month after that incident, and here at Villanova, the concerned citizens had permission from the administration to picket Dow Chemical, but were limited to 5 demonstrators only, and warned to keep it non-disruptive. According to the Villanovan article on November 15th, following the event, the peaceful demonstrators were, quote, heckled and jeered by crowds that at times swelled to over 250 students. They were soaked with water, pelted with eggs, and other debris. The university did not provide any protection. Campus police were notified but failed to respond. One student in the crowd stated that, quote, he could not wait to get back to his room and get some apples so he could return and pelt those jerks. Despite the attacks, the concerned citizens did not leave their place in front of the placement office at Sheehan Hall. The demonstration continued the next day as well, and this time university placed several security officers in and around the building. The following issue of the Villanovan contained no less than 5 articles dedicated to the event and several letters to the editor, so it got people talking. Most conveyed that they disagreed with the concerned citizens on several issues, but acknowledged the right to free speech and freedom of expression as fundamentally important principles. And the faculty responded with a motion passed by the Villanova chapter of the AAUP. It stated, the AAUP commends all Villanova students who are interested enough in contemporary problems to form organizations for their serious study and for the responsible expression of opinions on them. 2, they commend the administration for permitting student organizations to express publicly their opinions on important issues, even though those opinions may be controversial. 3, deplores the use of violence by Villanova students against other students in order to prevent them from expressing controversial opinions in a responsible and legal manner. 4, urges the student body as a whole to remember that it is a fundamental duty of a university to provide a forum for the free expression of ideas on major issues and for the debate thereof in a proper scholarly fashion. 5, deplores the failure of the administration to provide adequate police protection to an officially approved demonstration when it was probable that violence might develop. And 6, urges the administration to establish as soon as possible and to enforce a suitable policy in regard to similar demonstrations in the future. The actions of the concerned citizens during the year of 1967 to 68 certainly challenged the image of Villanova students as a group of, quote, do-nothings and conservatives. And that was a quote I saw a lot in the Villanova. Seems to have crystallized at least the beginnings of a more active student body willing to address larger social issues. And indeed, the following academic year, in 1968, the university issued an official policy statement on mass demonstrations, and Student Government Association first proposed a Student Bill of Rights. And both of these documents are part of Villanova University Archives record group on student clubs and organizations. Now I'm going to jump to the 1980s. There were other demonstrations throughout the 70s, but we're mostly focusing on the divestment here. So from the late 70s through the early 90s, but during the mid-1980s especially, students led anti-apartheid campaigns on campuses across the United States. The movement sought to influence university administrations to financially divest from companies operating in South Africa in protest of the legalized segregation and racial oppression in place under the apartheid system. The movement was, of course, part of an international global social movement to put pressure on the South African government and relevant to the growing call for corporations to divest interest in South Africa. So many U.S. companies and business operations in South Africa recognized and signed the Sullivan Principles, which was a widespread corporate code of conduct established by the Reverend Leon Sullivan, who was a civil rights leader and Baptist minister at Philadelphia's Zion Baptist Church, and he was a board member of General Motors. The principles of the code, introduced in 1977, included companies to commit to non-segregation of workers, equal and fair employment practices, equal pay, training programs for Black and non-white employees, and the improvement in the quality of Black and non-white employees' lives outside the work environment. As a side note, Reverend Leon Sullivan was awarded an honorary degree for Doctor of Social Science by Villanova in 1967. And this is a page from the commencement program for that year. And it appears that Sullivan personally wrote and sent information out. These 2 letters received by the University President Driscoll's office in February and May of 1985. The first inviting him to meet with fellow college presidents on April 3rd, 1985 at the Yale Club in New York. I can't be sure if he went or not, but it's not on his daily calendar, which I did look at. It's also in our university archives. So not on that day. The day before, he's got penciled in meeting with former basketball coach Al Severance, and the very next day penciled in is basketball team travels to the White House. So that was, of course, the year Villanova won its very first NCAA championship. So this is 1985. By then, 55 colleges and universities had partially or fully divested, with Michigan State University in 1978 being the first university to officially divest. A letter to the editor in the Villanovan September 13, 1985 issue states, Although a wave of silence exists on campus, a maelstrom of fury exists worldwide regarding apartheid. It amazes me that a religiously based university like Villanova did not divest years ago. And opposite that letter in the same issue appeared an article by Edward A. Sullivan, no relation to Leon Sullivan. He was moderator of the student chapter of Amnesty International at Villanova and later associate director of the Center for Peace and Justice Education. So this article, he writes of an impending September 20th vote by University Senate on a resolution that was proposed by Amnesty International and several co-sponsoring groups, quote, condemning apartheid and asking the president and board of trustees to examine whether or not Villanova's policies indirectly contribute to apartheid in South Africa. And he, in the article, appeals to universities' Christian moral values and the mission statement. And he concludes, students and faculty should urge their senators to approve the resolution, remembering, as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The resolution passed, and it passed the following Board of Trustees meeting as well. The investment committee, along with University President Driscoll, was directed to take appropriate action to demonstrate the university's adherence to the Sullivan principles. In March 1986, a newly formed student group, Villanova Anti-Apartheid Coalition, met with President Driscoll to ask for detailed clarification of the extent of divestment. The coalition represented various student groups on campus and was formed of members from Pax Christi, the Black Cultural Society, Amnesty International, and Villanovans for Life. Driscoll stated that the Villanova was in the process of divesting and had, quote, taken very definite action to divest from any company which supports apartheid or is not signatory to the Sullivan principles. And throughout that spring and summer, the coalition continued to send letters to the president's office, pressuring for more details. According to President Driscoll, later that fall, in September 26, 1986 issue of the Villanovan, he stated, it is my understanding that Villanova, in its investments portfolio, has completely divested from South Africa. We have made efforts in both areas, including the common fund and the investments portfolio, to respond to the situation. Apart from the statement as it was reported in the Villanovan, there doesn't seem to have been any more public announcement of divestment. In fact, the very same issue contains several op-eds from students debating whether or not the university should even consider divesting at all. And members of the Anti-Apartheid Coalition were reported as being skeptical of the quietness of the announcement. And later that fall, Driscoll contradicted his earlier statement by saying the university actually still held about $550,000 in 7 companies doing business in South Africa. The Villanovan quotes economics professor Dr. John F. Stale, as defending Driscoll's statement, explaining that investment companies are continually buying and selling other companies. He said, Father Driscoll has to say, to the best of my knowledge, because of all the changes in the marketplace. It's the only position he can take. I don't really think he is waffling. So apartheid divestment at Villanova was, for the most part, achieved by small student groups petitioning or meeting with the University Senate, Board of Trustees, and the President, and likely outside influence and pressure caused effect as well. This is a statement by the Villanova Anti-Apartheid Coalition, and they noted, the activity of the coalition has been in accord with the overall climate of Villanova University. Compared with movements at such academic institutions as Harvard University and University of Pennsylvania, at which shanty towns have been erected and sit-ins in the office of the president staged, the anti-apartheid movement of Villanova seems restrained. Many are of the opinion that more radical forms of protest would be self-defeating at Villanova. The Anti-Apartheid Coalition later changed its name to the Student Coalition Against Apartheid and Racism, or SCAR. SCAR continued on campus with a mission to raise awareness and educate the university community about apartheid and damaging effects of racism. They held regular meetings and sponsored speakers to campus. Before I turn it back over to Beaudry, I just wanted to show that everything I've shared today is open and accessible to researchers. Of course, I didn't open the website. I don't even know. Okay, this is are you seeing this? Okay. This is the Falvey Library website, and if we go to this Distinctive Collections Digital Library, this is everything we have from university archives and special collections and other digital partners as well. Things that have been digitized and online. There's a lot here. This first row is university archive stuff that you can kind of browse selections. We've got thousands of photographs from archives. The Villanova, and these are issues from 1893 to 1995. And these, I want to say that they have been scanned from microfilm, and so they're all black and white, and some of the pictures are kind of hard to see. But we have the originals, and we brought some stuff, and there's one volume of bound Villanovans there. You can always make an appointment with us to see the original copies, and we're often going back and doing rescans to get better images of the pictures. But you can they're fully text searchable. And we've got athletics, the yearbooks, commencement programs, university catalogs, and of course, what I mean when fully text searchable, you can put in a keyword, things come up here. These are all the Villanovans. And there's an example. We also want to show you back on Falvey's site and our University Archives page. This link will get you to another search for our University Archives collections. This is where some of those other items that I showed in the slides are in these student record groups or the university president records. And those are searchable and browsable in the finding aid, of course, at like the folder level. So, for example, I found apartheid, and it'll show you there is a folder called apartheid. That's where I pulled most of the stuff in President Driscoll's records. But to see the actual stuff, you make an appointment with us, and we'll pull the stuff for you, and you can look at it yourself in archives. So I'm going to turn it back over to Beaudry, and she's going to talk a little bit more about a recent donation of papers that in a way led to this presentation.
Yeah, so last year we received a collection from a donor, Stephen Smith, an alumni at Villanova. And the collection has a lot of material from SCAR, as Rebecca mentioned, as well as from the Center of Peace and Justice and student activism. There are speeches, there's photographs, there's old posters. So after this session, please stop by, take a look at the material that we have. But what I wanted to talk about a little bit is, it's through archival material that we can get a lot more historical context about a snapshot of the culture of the time. And a really great example that I got from the donor, Stephen Smith, was these posters from 1989. It says, "All I want for Christmas is to have these companies out of South Africa." And the first one is ACS approved, and it's dated December 15th, 1989. But then we have a second poster that's dated December 20th, 1989. And there's a difference. Can you guys see the difference? So I'll push you out here, mister. So it says Grum, cork, and seal at the top of this one. But then it seems to be moved down further down the list. So the story is, this was approved, but the president's office saw this, that this was going to be, these posters and this event was going to happen. And so the president's office asked them to take this company down because it was a donor to the university. So to maintain that relationship, but also, interestingly enough, allowing students to continue to protest and advocate for divestment, the president's office allowed these posters to go up, and they just moved the title of the company down. So it's information like this that's in the archives that will tell you a more detailed story of what it was like on campus. And why I wanted to do this presentation is because, you know, archivists are talking about student activism much more, because essentially campus activism has played a major role in shaping higher education itself. Generations of students have pushed colleges to end discriminatory policies, increase campus safety, and improve student life. Having records preserved about student involvement, especially their relationship with administration, is a representation of campus history as well as national history, and these records also represent social memory of Villanova. So collecting these events are important. But not only do archivists today collect this material, but there's a concerted effort to highlight student activism in the archives. The best example is ProjectSTAND. It's a community of archivists, memory workers, student organizers, and scholars dedicated to a movement that centers the voices of student organizers and groups. And why there's sort of a convergence of activism and archiving occurring so acutely is because there's a significant shift in archiving practices. First and foremost is understanding student experience as historical value. And those are records that are going to be meaningful not only for researchers, but future student activists. Also, in the last 10 years, there's been a significant work of community organizing and archivists collaborating together, where archivists will come and help highlight and support student organizations in action. And that's what is sort of considered a reparative archival practice, which even in the moment of collecting, we celebrate and support student organizers. Another shift that's occurring is called radical empathy archiving. It's an emphasis on community building through preservation. In the article, From Human Rights to Feminist Ethics, Radical Empathy in the Archives, Michelle Caswell and Mary Kay Seaford define radical empathy as the willingness to be affected, to be shaped by other people's experiences, without blurring the lines between the self and the other. And that's identifying archivists as caregivers whose responsibility is not bound to just the records, but to the creators, the subjects, the users, and the community, which essentially is the archivist. It does right by the creators with the material today, and we as archivists have to be represented in the community, so we have to be an ally in community actions. So I will show you what that looks like. Just kidding. So this is ProjectSTAND. This has tons of resources. It has also a list of collections that you can search other archive collections around student organizing, events. You can look through African American collections, LGBTQ+ collections, anti-war collections. as you can see, you can scroll down for images. There's also a digital library that you can search nationally, different images of protests as well as speeches. And then there's also the Blueprint podcast. The archivists are helping student organizers with advocacy, and there's also toolkits for student organizing on here as well. Tufts University has like a divestment toolkit. So that basically concludes our session. If you guys have any questions, let us know.
How did you find the backstory of the two, I missed that, of the two sisters?
It was from the donor himself. Yeah. And then so through the records of like looking through the Villanova and Father Driscoll's papers is that, and then you can kind of substantiate, like, of course that was happening, that there are documentation that there was a relationship from the President's office with the Center of Peace and Justice.
So it was archives and oral history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I want to give students a chance, but I'm going to ask. This is so fascinating, and as someone who is directing the Center for Peace Education, it's very cool to be able to see that history. I love what you guys are doing. Can you say more about how new material, like, so there's a donor who's giving you, but how are the archives collecting materials right now from current student groups, or like how would materials that are being generated, in this academic year, how would they eventually find their way to the archive?
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, it was slow relationship building of like reaching out to student organizations and kind of being like, hey, we're here, we have records of your organization in the past, come see them, look at them, as well as like developing a relationship of like then donating and transferring material to the university archives. Since the pandemic, we really haven't restarted it because we couldn't actually collect anything. But usually it's myself, or we have student workers who will be like, hey, I'm in the student organization and we're doing this. And then from there, we'll collect material from them. And then also from the Center of Peace and Justice and the College of Liberal Arts, they have their sort of academic transfer into the archives, and so we'll receive material that way. I think I do that in the sense of, rather than asking students individually, is kind of respecting like this is their student organization. They are within their rights to want to think about their own preservation, and that can be collaborating, or they can just be transferring stuff, or they could just be asking like, oh, should I keep this? So, yeah.
You guys are welcome to come and look at what we brought. If there's no more questions.
Well, just following up on that, I'm just trying to think of how this connects. As you know, there's a divestment town hall tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Students have been involved in this now for months. This follows on, it's easily been years, of continuing to build to this process. How will their material, be introduced into archives? And then also, when you mentioned Tufts University has, a divestment, toolkit. I don't know that group is aware of your work or your connection.
Yeah, my connection was from Gracie and Yvonne back in 2019, who I'm sure they've graduated since then.
Of course, right.
Yeah, so we just haven't been able to reestablish those relationships.
Okay.
Yeah. But with that group, I went to the walk, I filmed it. They gave us posters from the protest, and then I also did an interview with them that's on our website of like how they did the organizing, and what does it mean to be student organizers at Villanova.
Yeah, I would encourage you to reach out to Student Life, to the Center for Peace, Justice, Education, the new Center for the Common Good. The idea of getting this in front of student leadership and student groups so that they're aware that it's even available, as well as encouraged.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Good.